Subscribe our channel to get the latest practice material. Well, we begin our story with the emergence of the Bronze Age in the Aegean Sea area. That appears to have taken place about 3000 BC. I think these days they date it down about another century to about 2900. Precision is impossible, don't worry about that. And what we find, the first example of a Bronze Age, and I use the word civilization now for the first time, because before the Bronze Age there is nothing that we would define as civilization. Civilization involves the establishment of permanent dwelling areas that we call cities, as opposed to villages. Agricultural villages will have existed all over the place in the Late Stone Age, in the Neolithic period, as it is known. But there is a difference, and the critical difference is that a city contains a number of people who do not provide for their own support. That is to say, they don't produce food. They need to acquire it from somebody else. Instead, they do various things like governing and are priests, and are bureaucrats, and are engaged in other non-productive activities that depend upon others to feed them. That's the narrowest definition of cities. As a part of our study of the effects of diseases on society, of the, social consequences of man's diseases, we should certainly include yellow fever. Now, yellow fever's a deadly disease that's caused by a virus, and it's been the source of many epidemics since at least the 18th century in Africa, Europe, and the Americas. In fact, it still kills more than 30,000 people a year worldwide. And there's still no cure for the disease. However, there is a vaccine to immunize us against it. The road to the discovery of that vaccine was a rocky one, I think. It's called yellow fever because one of its symptoms is jaundice, a yellowish color that the skin takes on, because of liver damage. It's transmitted by mosquitoes, either from man to man, this is called the urban cycle, or from monkey to man, this is called the sylvatic or jungle cycle. The disease probably originated in West Africa, and it was carried from there to the West Indies and the New World in the 18th century with the ships of the slave trade. The first big outbreak of yellow fever happened in Cuba in 1762 and 1763, and it killed thousands of American and British colonial troops there. After that, between then and 1900, it killed about 10% of Cuba's population. The Western countries' women, especially those under 30 years old, are becoming more and more reluctant to give birth to babies. However, the male status in the society remains strong in recent years. The birth rates increased during 20th century, but it remained to decrease in the last 2 decades, reaching its historical low. In the year 2000, the birth rate remained at around 1%. There are even some negative birth rates in other countries. Birth rate dropped to its lowest point that has never been seen in the history. It also has impacts on male in the society, especially the young man, and it might have some connection with unemployment rate as well. I'm just going to take on the stuff where left off. The whole I want to now talk about, it's called melatonin. The synthesis is in the pineal gland, which is very small. It is the size of a pea in your brain. The corpus is the site of the soul, and it is where melatonin is made. And it has a rhythm as well. And in the sense, it is the opposite of the kisum. It peaks at night. We call it as the darkness hormone. In every species that we studied, melatonin occurs at night. And it's hormone that prepares you for the things that your species does at night. So, of course, in humans we sleep, but animals, like rodents, they are awake. It's hormone that is related to darkness behavior. Protons are finally transferred to the LHC, both in a clockwise and an anti-clockwise direction, where they are accelerated for 20 minutes to 6.5 dev. Beams circulate for many hours inside the LHC beam pipes under normal operating conditions. For each collision, the physicist's goal is to count, track and characterize all the different particles. The charge of the particle, for instance, is obvious since particles with positive electric charge bend one way and those with negative charge bend the opposite way. Also, the momentum of the particle can be determined. Large Hadron Collider, LHC, is the world's largest particle accelerator, lies in a tunnel. The LHC is a ring roughly 28 kilometers around that accelerates protons almost to the speed of light before colliding them head-on. Protons are particles found in the atomic nucleus, roughly 1,000 millionth of a meter in size. The LHC starts with a bottle of hydrogen gas, which is sent through an electric field to strip away the electrons, leaving just the protons. Electric and magnetic fields are the key to a particle accelerator. We can ask two fundamental questions about animal behavior they referred to as proximate and ultimate. Proximate questions are those concerned with the mechanisms that bring about behavior. Ultimate questions are those concerned with the evolution of behavior. We can divide the proximate and ultimate into two sub-questions. For proximate, how does behavior develop, and secondly, what causes the behavior? For ultimate, you can ask how did the behavior evolve, and secondly, what is the adaptive of significance of the behavior? What's its purpose? Together these comprise what are called Tinbergen's 4 questions about animal behavior. Nico Tinbergen was one of the founding fathers of the study of the animal behaviors. These questions represent different ways of studying animal behavior, and understanding the difference between those 4 questions are fundamental to understanding behavior and indeed the whole of biology. How do we study animal behavior? Well, that depends on the type of question we're hoping to answer. Today, we will discuss the relationship between the fault lines in the Earth's crust and an earthquake. This dislocation of the rock occurs from the Earth's surface, 7 kilometers to several hundred kilometers vertically down to the crust. The earthquake's focus is called epicenter, which is vertically beneath the interior of the Earth's crust, and the energy releases and transfers through epicenter. The faults are the fracture on the Earth's crust. The position of the epicenters can be identified by the faults maps, looking down from the center of the Earth. It will result in seismic wave which is decreased as it moved away from the epicenter. All of my research and that I conducted was my 60+ graduate students, was motivated by their need to learn, so that we can teach. Of course, some inventions happened along the way, but I've always considered the end the result. And I always consider that this invention to be byproducts of the learning process. The end product for me was always better understanding, or when one really succeeded in unifying theory that can help us in teaching the subject. I've also looked at teaching as a vehicle to try new ideas, of new ways to doing things on an intelligent group of learners. That is, as the vehicle for the teaching research results. And in my experience, this kind of teaching is the most stimulated and motivating to students. I am also uncovered many interesting research problems is the cause of teaching assumption. It is this unity of research and teaching, their close connection and the benefits gathered by exercising and the interplay that to me recognize the successful professor. So, when we talk about the polar regions, just to clarify exactly what we mean. And we have first of all the Arctic at the top of the Earth and the Antarctic at the bottom, and so the Arctic was named after the Greek word for bear. Now surprisingly, it's not after the polar bears that live in the Antarctic or live in the Arctic, and based on it's after the Little and Great Bear constellations that can be seen in the sky. Now the Greek also hypothesized that there would be the Antarctic, which is how we get the name Antarctica, and of course it wasn't discovered until much later on. Now these regions are opposite in many ways other than just their names and their location on the globe, and so if we look at the Arctic first of all, and the Arctic is actually ocean surrounded by land, and so you can see here this is the UK down here and this kind of Russia and then American Canada around here, and so there is a bit of land cover in our ice on the top in the Arctic, which is Greenland here, and may see all this area here. Surprisingly, a lot of people don't realize that this isn't actually land. The North Pole isn't on land. It's just one big ocean. But a new study of fish called sticklebacks shows that shy individuals actually prefer to follow fish that are similarly timid. Researchers had trios of sticklebacks with known personalities play follow the leader. The fish were placed in a tank that had some plastic plants at one end and some food hidden at the other. In some of the groups, a bold fish and a shy fish acted as leaders, while another shy fish followed. And in other groups, it was a bold fish that did the following. The researchers recorded whether the follower sallied forth more frequently with the fish that was behaviorally similar or the one that was different. What they found is that shy fish were more likely to emerge from undercover when an equally wary fellow was already out there. Bold follower fish did not seem to care which leader they followed. Of course, no matter which fish a stickleback chose to stick with, the bold fish did lead more expeditions over the course of the experiment than their more retiring friends. That's because the bold fish initiated more trips, regardless of who might be tailing them. The researchers write that when offered a choice of leaders, sticklebacks prefer to follow individuals whose personality matches their own, but bolder individuals may, nevertheless, be able to impose their leadership, even among shy followers, simply through greater effort. As Joanne pointed out, only one country, tiny little Bhutan, wedged between China and India, has adopted the gross national happiness as the central index of the government policy, and actually has a good deal of success in education and in health and in economic growth and in environmental preservation. They have a rather sophisticated way of measuring the effects of different policies on people's happiness. They are the only country to go that far. But you are now beginning to get other countries interested enough to do kind of white paper policy analyses of happiness research. What effects would it have if we used it more for public policy? You are beginning to get countries like Australia, France, Great Britain, that are considering publishing regular statistics on happiness. So it is beginning to become a subject of greater interest for policymakers and legislators in different advanced countries. This is a kind of object that you're probably all familiar with when you had the term robot, but I'm gonna show you the very first robots. These were the very first robots. They were characters in a play in the 1920s called Rossum's Universal Robots, and the play was written by Czech writer called Karel Čapek. And basically, these robots, people tend to think of robots as kind of cute cuddly toys or, Hollywood depictions kind of devoid of politics. But the first robots were actually created and imagined in a time of absolute political turmoil. You just had the First World War, it finished had a devastating impact across Europe, and so people are kind of reflecting on what does it mean to be human, what makes us human, those kinds of question. And this kind of context is what inspired Čapek to kind of write this play. And interestingly, these robots being human, they are actually in the play assembled on a production line, a bit like the Ford manufacturing production line. So even though they are human, they are assembled, and these robots are designed to labor, and that is their primary purpose in society. Climate change, some adverse effects of climate changes to agricultural productions. Some lands are unsuitable for growing crops. There will be millions of people facing hunger in Africa in the future. Climate change will result in less production and less food. It is difficult for developing countries to deal with climate change due to their financial status and other issues. There are many people living in hunger, especially in Africa. The climate change has devastating effects on world economy. The tropical areas on Earth are dry and hot, and are originally not suitable for food production. The change of the climate leads to extreme weather conditions such as flood and hurricane, which exacerbates the food production. As a result, it leads to a continuous decline in food supply annually around 10–17%. And this trend is perceived to be continue in the future by 2070. The regions suffering the most will be some African countries. Three stages of brain development. Brain development during childhood. There are three stages, starting from the primitive brain, the action brain, limbic brain, feeling brain, and finally to the neocortex, thought brain. Although interrelated, the three had its own function. Primitive brain functions to manage the physical, to survive, manage reflex, motor motion control, monitoring body functions, and process information coming from sensing. Limbic brain functioning as a liaison to process emotions, and the brain thinks, and the primitive brain. While the thinking brain, which is the most objective part of the brain, receiving input from the primitive brain and the limbic brain. However, he needed more time to process information from the primitive brain and the limbic brain. The brain thinks the merger is also a place of experience, memory, feeling, and thinking ability to give birth to ideas and actions. Nerve myelination of the brain take place in sequence, starting from the primitive brain, the limbic brains, and brain thought. Neural pathways are more frequently used to make more myelin thicken. Increasingly thicker myelin, the faster the nerve impulses or signals travel along nerves. Therefore, a growing child is encouraged to receive input from the environment in accordance with its development. Let's take a look at this video of these little kids. They were offered the option of having one marshmallow immediately now or two marshmallows 15 minutes later, and you've got some very cute videotape of this experiment. So let's take a look. Okay, what we found is a very simple and direct way of measuring a competence that seems to make an important life difference. A researcher tells these preschoolers that she's going to leave the room if they wait for her to come back without eating the marshmallows. They'll get 2 marshmallows, or they can ring the bell and she'll come back right away, but then they only get 1 marshmallow. I would, baby, though you won't ring the bell. Okay, looking at children over time. Dr. Michelle has found that being able to wait longer at 4 has some pretty powerful implications, and what are those powerful implications is that later in life, They're more disciplined and have more self-control. Is that pretty much it? Well, they are more likely to achieve their life goals. They have better relationships. They did better on their essays. Crazy, all because they waited 15 minutes for Don't Wash Me, and I think it is crazy. I probably would have eaten all three, but yeah, me too. But actually yes, the ability to be able to pursue your goals. In this case it was stabbed 2 marshmallows versus 1 and not going automatic and just grabbed the marshmallow is a very important skill, but I think a main point in mind in the making is that these skills can be taught if you re 14 or 40 or 4. It's not ever too late, and any child can learn them, any adult can teach them, and it's never too late. This illustration often used is the one that the monkeys and the typewriters. Okay, we have a monkey sitting at a typewriter, and the claim here is basically if you leave chance in time long enough you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's as strange, yes, it's wonderful, but leave enough matter 600 million years on Earth and you will have life. So, the monkey sitting at the typewriter, the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare. So what's the problem? So, there's no problem. There's no issue, right? You just leave it long enough and you'll find. And 1 key striker seconds, the monkey might well eventually get to you the complete works of Shakespeare, but he doesn't manage to do it in 600 million years. So, what I decided to do is to run the numbers. Instead of saying typing the complete work of Shakespeare, I just run the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing 1 key striker a second. To type to be or not to be, that is the question. Right? On average, how long is it gonna take my monkey friend 1 keystroke a second? I don't know how you think it would be. Maybe you could have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years? Which is the period life on Earth isn't supposed to have emerged within, and when I run the numbers to be or not to be is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type just that phrase, and a DNA string has got as much as information the Encyclopedia Britannica. Are we saying that something of that complexity emerges by chance undirected within 600 million years? Again, it's mathematically possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely that it would have that it tilts me in favor of the Christian story in which God creating life, simply a question of saying let that be, and there was. Do you have trouble sleeping at the night? Then maybe this is for you. When you worry about needing sleep and toss and turn trying to find a comfortable position, You are probably only making matters worse. What happens when you do that is that your heart rate actually increases, making it more difficult to relax. You may also have some bad habits that contribute to the problem. Do you rest frequently during the day? Do you get virtually no exercise, or do you exercise strenuously late in the day? Are you preoccupied with sleep, or do you sleep late on weekends? Any or all of these factors might be leading to your insomnia by disrupting your body's natural rhythm. What should you do then on those sleepless nights? Don't bother with sleeping pills, they can actually cause worse insomnia later. The best thing to do is drink milk or eat cheese or tuna fish. These are all rich in amino acids and help produce a neurotransmitter in the brain that induces sleep. This neurotransmitter will help you relax, and you'll be on your way to getting a good night's sleep until tomorrow's broadcast. This has been another in the series Hints for Good Health. Scientists preparing for NASA's proposed Jupiter icy moons orbiter believe that Jupiter's moon's Europa may be a corrosive mixture of acid and peroxide. Thus, it may not be the ideal place for life to exist, as was thought possibly to be the case. Virtually all the information we have about Europa comes from the spacecraft Galileo, which completed its mission to study Jupiter and its moons close up before NASA dramatically crashed it into Jupiter in 2003. Although the general perception of Europa is of a frozen crust of water ice harboring a salty subterranean ocean kilometer below, researchers studying the most recent measurements say light reflected from the moon's icy surface bears the spectral fingerprints of hydrogen peroxide and strong acids. However, they accept that it could just be a thin surface dusting and might not come from the ocean below. Only one country, tiny little Bhutan, wedged between China and India, has adopted the gross national happiness as the central index of government policy, and actually has a good deal of success in education and in health and in economic growth and in environmental preservation. They have a rather sophisticated way of measuring the effects of different policies on people's happiness. They are the only country to go that far. But you are now beginning to get other countries interested enough to do kind of white paper policy analyses of happiness research. What effects would it have if we used it more for public policy? You are beginning to get countries like Australia, France, Great Britain, that are considering publishing regular statistics on happiness. So it is beginning to become a subject of greater interest for policymakers and legislators in different advanced countries. Aquaculture, the farming of fish, shrimp, shellfish and seaweeds, has been the source of human protein for nearly 4,000 years, especially in Asia. In the last decade, however, there has been unprecedented growth in aquaculture production, more than 300% since 1984, which has increased the importance of the modern food supply. It's the world's fastest growing food production activity. And globally, more than 25% of the odd fishing and shellfish production in 1999 was attributable to aquaculture. This industry's contributions to human diet is actually greater than the numbers imply, whereas 1/3 of the conventional fish catch is used to make fish meal and fish oil. Virtually all farmed fish are used as human food. Today, nearly 1/3 of fish consumed by a human is the product of aquaculture, and that percentage will only increase as aquaculture expands the world's conventional fish catch, for the oceans and lakes continues to decline because of overfishing and environmental damage.